it wasn't until my kids got a lot older that I realized, like, even though I was still in a growth environment, we did a lot of conscious parenting, I had stopped transforming myself. I had really pulled myself back and was playing it safe and kind of taking the coach role and helping other people, and really had stopped exploring for myself. So that's what led me into my second master's, but then eventually my doctorate, to explore that. Like, wow, why was that so hard? What happened? And this concept that emerged from that was rewriting the mother code.
Hey, this is Chad Namiro.
And I'm Kelley Namiro. Welcome to the Balancing Chaos podcast,
A lifestyle podcast where we will interview guests about wellness, business, and just about everything in between.
Our goal is to help you develop a lifestyle that promotes health, wholeness, and success. Through our conversations, we hope to inspire you to live a beautiful, full, and joyful life as you navigate balancing the chaos.
We hope you enjoy.
Dr. Gertrude Lyons is a professional life coach with over 20 years of experience. She is focused on exploring, demystifying, and democratizing the maternal power that lives in all of us. Maternal power, or the power of the feminine energy, is in receiving and creativity. Feminine energy is not just for women, but in something that we all should possess. It's the power to birth something new into this world, product, art, a company, the list goes on. And because of this, she believes that mothering is inclusive of all genders. And so that collectively we can rebirth a nuanced focus on the concept of what it means to be a mother. Motherhood is a transformational journey that all can take to empower love and love of oneself holistically. So together, she wants us to all start this new conversation around motherhood. And we're going to talk a lot about that today, but we're also going to talk about how we know Dr. Gertrude Lyons. She was our relationship coach for a while, starting back in 2020. And so we're very excited to kind of go into that and talk about relationships and what red flags might be and how to connect more deeply as a couple. Without further ado, welcome, Dr. Gertrude Lyons. Thank you for being with us.
Oh my gosh, thank you both so much for making this happen and inviting me on. It's truly a thrill and pleasure.
It's good to see you. It's been
You
too
too.
long. We were just talking about
I know.
that.
So we know, but tell us how for our audience and our listeners, how you kind of got into coaching couples, coaching women. How did that all begin for you?
All right. Well, I won't take the whole podcast to talk about my journey, but I'll give some highlights because, I think hearing each other's stories and how, these paths, because I definitely didn't start my career as a life coach. I actually graduated with a degree in finance and accounting and did 10 years as an economic analyst in personal injury and wrongful death litigation. Yeah. So a little different, but so interesting, the cross sections, because my boss, when I got engaged to be married, what will be, let's see, I think we're celebrating 33 years in June.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. It's something I'm most proud of in my life. But he suggested doing premarital coaching or counseling. At that time, coaching wasn't such a thing, but doing premarital counseling. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm in my 20s. Like, I found this guy. I love him. And, this is just going to be amazing. And, he's smart, successful. Like, it had all of those pieces to it. But something kind of nuggled inside me. And I'm like, well, yeah, but maybe, like, we have had some communication issues. And, but then if I really look, and, I started thinking about, and the realization that both of us came from divorced families. There was alcoholism on both sides of the family. It's like, if those were our models, I had some stroke of insight, even at that naive time, to say, like, gosh, maybe there is talking to someone wouldn't be the worst thing, to like learn a little bit about how to do this and not end up like our parents. So we did. So we started on that journey, and that kind of like kicked off a whole, like, what's now been a whole lifetime of dedication to personal growth, our couple. And over that 10 years where I was working as an analyst, I did my own, I was doing my own work. We were, as a couple, we started leading groups for other couples. These things just kind of happen. And the work I was doing, even in litigation, I was in contact with people, and I'm applying what I'm learning to people that had wrongful injuries and dealing with, these traumatic things. and I was applying what I was learning. I'm like, I really like this, like the numbers thing,
Yeah.
do I want a PhD in economics? No, definitely don't. So if I'm going to go somewhere, it's in that end. And that's also when we decided to start a family, and, little kids came on the scene. I'm like, yeah, I think it's time for a change. So that's when I went back to school, got my first master's degree in psychology, started coaching just, part-time, and then, worked as a family on some of these principles and what it means to explore and work on yourself and self-awareness stuff as a family. But I realized that while I did a really great job of that when it was just the two of us in a couple, I like led the way as a couple, and, we're going to rock the boat and things. But when kids came along, I started really backing off, and a lot more fear came up for me around the vulnerability of what it means to, keep stay on your edge, and a lot more was at stake. So it wasn't until my kids got a lot older that I realized, like, even though I was still in a growth environment, we did a lot of conscious parenting, I had stopped transforming myself. I had really pulled myself back and was playing it safe and kind of taking the coach role and helping other people, and really had stopped exploring for myself. So that's what led me into my second master's, but then eventually my doctorate, to explore that. Like, wow, why was that so hard? What happened? And this concept that emerged from that was rewriting the mother code. Like, what was encoded in me that allowed me to go a certain distance, but then, really, really kind of pull back on that. So so exploring that, and, since finishing my doctorate, then this has been my passion and mission, to work with women, but to keep working with couples, because was my beginnings. I really see so much value in that. And then, whether, you have children or not, there's a lot to work on as a couple, and we're not trained, right? We don't, grow up, we don't go to school for that. We're just supposed to know, but really the only training we had was our own upbringing. So I'll stop there. That kind of gives you, does that get us going well enough?
That's fabulous. I think that before we jump into the mother code, because that even is like, as you said, like the secondary kind of like part when you got your doctorate and all of that, we definitely want to jump into that. One of the things that Chad and I wanted to talk about was our relationship and how you coached us, and in a time that was kind of challenging for us. It was COVID. We had just had our first child. I was just starting my job. And we had thought at the beginning that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And so it was a lot of change all at once. But what you said that had come up with, your husband at the beginning of your marriage, communication, was also an issue for us, because Chad is a person who's direct, and I'm a person who is conflict avoidant, or was, in the past, where we definitely worked on it and are still working on it. Is communication something that you see as an issue for a lot of different couples?
It probably would be at the top of the list of what people say. It's like, even when like so much is great, but I just feel like we could communicate better. And, that's a broad term, and it takes some unpacking to well, what do you want to communicate more about? But it leads the way and opens the door, like, to know that there's even, when things are going decently or well, like there's something more, like something's missing, and we're missing each other in some of our communication in some ways. And that's, a great place to start, even to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that we want that to be better.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of couples come to you when they start having kids? I'm sure you've seen it across all areas or across the spectrum, rather, of the timeline. But do you see a lot of people start to struggle with these things as they have kids and kind of enter that period of their life?
Yeah. Well, and I think you're naming something broader, which is transitions, right? Like, my husband and I came in when we got married. We saw an opportunity there that was like, kind of presented itself. A next big transition then is, everything from like the choice, I've worked with couples like deciding if they're going to have kids and what that means to them. And that's can be a huge exploration. I worked with you guys, but just recently started working with a couple. They just had their fourth child.
Oh my gosh.
And they're like, we saw you when we had our first, because that was like huge and big. But we did pretty well with second and third, but four, we need to talk again.
Such is my concern.
Well, I want four. So we talk about it. And I think that, like, I think that is like all of the transitions and times of change are they not are challenging, but they can be challenging because change is really uncomfortable for people. Yeah. And so it seems like a really appropriate time for someone to want to come to see you. And so like for anyone out there that's like a you know, in a relationship and who feels like they need, let's just focus on the communication piece. Like if there was like one tangible tip that you could give them, or two like really good tips, like where do they start?
When I'm working with somebody and like we're, you know, that first comes up, it's really to kind of sit down with each other and look at like what do you like about your communication and how it's going, and what do you not like, right? Like what's working, because you want to like always have a positive aspect to it. Like what can we celebrate? Like what works in our relationship, and what, you know, what works with our communication, so you're not coming in it just as a deficit. Give each other space, give each person like 2 to 5 minutes to just talk about both, right? Like a couple of minutes on what do you not like, and then an open share on like what you don't like, and don't interrupt them, you know, because it's easy when these things start coming up to like get defensive immediately, or, you know, kind of want to minimize, and that's natural, right? That's it's going to happen. But if you can give each other space to just start with that sharing, what do I like, what don't I like, and then, you know, from there, sometimes you immediately see some pathways of like, oh, okay, we both don't like that. All right, you know, what's something that maybe we can do about that, right? Like, and then we, you know, it kind of goes from there.
I think that's a big one, because for those listening that haven't done coaching or therapy as a couple, I think what's really important, or at least was for me, is that third party kind of is a really positive intermediary. And
yes, I was literally just thinking the same thing. It's like sometimes you might not be open to feedback, but when there's somebody else in the mix who's sitting there and like listening to both of you, you're so much more receptive to what the other person might be saying and how you guys can start to make it work, versus getting, I mean, I know this is one of my biggest things. Like I'm so defensive. And so it having you with us, you know, that was probably one of the most helpful things. Besides all the tools you provided, it's just like, which has like that positive intermediary.
Well, you just get into these cycles, I feel like, and you tend to, or I assume, and you could tell us, but you tend to fight about the same things, and you get in this like evolving cycle, and there's really no outcome, and the circle's not complete.
Yeah, the same. Do you see that with people, like they have the same argument over and over again?
Yeah.
I feel like that's
so. I think for us, you helped kind of really resolve down to some of the roots of some of that, and help provide some resolution and offer some tools. And so anyway, it was
a really great experience for us. I think that one of the things that I had a question about was like, you talked about that family that has 4 kids. It's like, and anyone with kids, it's like probably one of the biggest things you see when you're coaching couples with kids is that it's hard to make time for each other, because especially if you're working, then you have the kids. It's like, when do you squeeze each other in?
Yeah.
Is your recommendation, and I know this answer, but I want to hear you say it for the audience, to actually create clear-cut times for each other? Or like, do you think that it's okay to kind of just let it all float on?
Yeah. Well, the answer is yes, clear-cut times. And there's, you know, within that you can have the floating, but when you have some structure to play within, and you two as a couple, or the couple knows that like we have a date night every week, you know, and or a date breakfast, you know, there's 1 or 2 times that we've dedicated and set aside. It's an appointment on our calendar. And we know even in the craziness of a week, ships in the night, we're going to have that time. Like, obviously you want to then, you know, build from there, but that creates a lot of security, knowing that, you know, a month isn't going to go by and we've hardly communicated. Because I think I probably shared this statistic, and this is old, and it's probably gotten worse with electronics, because this was before we were on electronics. But the average amount of time that a couple spends in 1 week, in a week's time, talking about something other than logistics or the like day-to-day stuff and like just real talk, is 17 minutes.
Are you kidding me?
No, that's the average. That's the average amount.
My gosh.
Sounds about right.
That is
Which
so sad.
it's startling, right? But then when you look at it, you see like, yeah, I can see how that happened.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and then the same, and I think we talked about this too, and now you have two, and it expands from there, that the kids that you each set up time, like
Alone time.
they don't,
We were just talking about that
yep,
yesterday.
they get little, I don't know if you should call them dates, but I don't have a problem with that. I said that to somebody like, I don't know, should you call it a date? I'm like, why not? Whatever.
Yeah.
And it could be, a longer time once a week, like an hour. It doesn't have to be a whole afternoon or anything. It'd be
Sure.
15 minutes, but they know, whether you decide to do that daily or,
Right.
whatever you can fit in, that they know you're going to put everything aside and you get some focused time together. Quantity isn't always the measure. It's, it really is the quality and how present am I, in the interaction, and same on your own dates with each other, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to kind of get even, my husband and I have found this, we'll get in a rut of like, well, we'll go to a movie, or our date is to,
Yeah.
basically not talk to each other, but we're
Yeah.
together. And
Yeah.
so, we have to watch out for all those things. You have to have some time in there where you're actually sharing with each other.
That's what I said, because we were going to do, so we're back on doing that again this year. We're doing Friday mornings because that's when we have a nanny, and we're doing a workout class. And I was like, look, like we can do a workout class, but we have to go and get like a smoothie or go do something afterwards where we actually have time to like talk to each other.
And you can put those together, right? You got to like,
Yeah.
find the intersection, and we're so busy and we're trying to pack it all in, but 100%. It's like, but we're going to be intentional about the drive if we're going somewhere. And if we're not, then we have to create that space, somewhere in the house or that where we sit down and are together.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. You got to set up the right scaffolding for the whole thing as well. Like you have to be very deliberate about your phones and all those things, because it's human. Well, sadly, I think it's kind of human nature at this point that you gravitate towards your phone and the dopamine hits that they provide. And so, you do need to be deliberate about what you do and, what you potentially won't talk about. Maybe it's like, we won't talk about work, or we won't talk about, like you said, logistics. That stuff's, it's tough. You got to be methodical about it. It's not
do you
just
remember
like doing an hour together. It's like,
no,
what does the hour
exactly
entail?
We can offer this too, because I sure we worked on this some, and it's an easy one. Another, like with dates to go back and forth in. But do you remember the 5-5? 5 minutes, 5 minutes. That habit, because who doesn't have 10 minutes in our day, right? Like, but it still takes. People always think like, yeah, we'll do that, no big deal. It's still a thing, because it means you're going to sit, and be with each other. And that, so to say specifically, for the audience, what we do in that is, you set aside 10 minutes somewhere, and it can be on the phone. This doesn't have to be face to face. The important thing is that literally you set a timer for 5 minutes and one person gets to just talk. But you hold kind of the same rule. You don't get to just like diary your day. I mean, you can talk about your day, but some things of note from it. And ideally we start weaving in emotions and feelings about the day and some things along those lines. And then, but that you don't talk about the other person. That's one of the ground rules. So this isn't a time to like dump on your partner, like, because they aren't allowed to talk back, because that person has to stay silent. Like that, you can have other conversations about. But in this time, it really is about you and sharing. And my husband and I go in and out of it, but when we do it consistently, it doesn't seem like a lot, but that just knowing that every day, again, like the date, it brings security. It allows you to like have some touch points, and you feel connected through the week in that way.
I think that is definitely something that's helpful. I feel like one of the big things that we did with you two was kind of like go back and explore like childhood wounds and I know you do that in the mother code too, and like how that can impact, how you then act as a mother, but it can also impact how you then are in a relationship. So can you talk a little bit about that, and what types of things might impact like someone's communication style, or if someone's triggered in a way,
or their argumentation style.
Yeah.
That stuff.
Yeah.
Is
Well, you
It's
mentioned,
really
yeah,
interesting
totally.
because when we kind of discovered those things about each other, it allowed us to hold more space and compassion for each other. I think when we did,
yeah.
one of us did get triggered. Does that sound right?
Goes to shit sometimes when we're fighting, but generally,
Yeah, exactly. It's the after, it's kind of like the post game, like, all right, now we can actually talk about this.
Right.
And get to that vulnerability. And I think that's what you're talking about, Kelley, as you're bringing that up. And I was going to say the same thing. It's, yes, I'm in rewriting the mother code. We want to look at where our programming, right? Because we're born into a family. The first 2 years of life, like our wiring is, well, even conception, even preconception somewhat, there's studies that show, the wiring that's happening is informing, ourselves and this little being, like what we can expect of the world, what we can expect, what the world, we think the world expects for us. Is it a safe place? Is it, so many of those dynamics are wired in, and that's pre-verbal. So that's down, deep in the unconscious, but we can still, when we kind of then get language and look at like the family atmosphere, we can start looking at like, how did our family operate? How did mom and dad, if it was a mom and dad family, or just the people I was around, how did they interact? What were their conflict relationship styles? Obviously on some of the, kind of more traumatic ends, like rageful, fighting, but even, some people are like, I just felt like my family was fine. And then, you start digging and you're like, well, because everybody was passive aggressive, or, we didn't, we avoided conflict, but it would leak out in these ways. And if you're, it's a courageous journey to start digging into those places. But as the two of you were saying, once you access some of that, and then with each other, you share that, it's like, oh, okay. So yeah, when you speak to me in that tone, that brings me, I'm right back talking to my father for, I'm not saying this is necessarily you two, but, I'm right back there with a tone of voice, and he may have even just a modicum of the same tone as a parent, but it doesn't matter. Like that, our system, is
your
gets
nervous
triggered
system
in the same way. You're just right back there as a 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 9-year-old, hearing that. So then you totally lose your partner. Like they're not even there. And that person has become mom or dad. And we might not catch that in the moment, of the fight, but sometimes, that even happens. To me, that's the beauty of conflict, right? We have this stuff. It's kind of intent. It's built into what it means to be a couple, but it's more like, if we don't go those layers deeper and explore, then that's when the pattern starts, right? It's like, well, every time like I do this, the other one reacts this way, and then we're like right in it, right? I'm defensive, I'm this and that. So and then it's the same with rewriting the mother code, right? Like it is that initial wiring is what we first want to explore, and then we go back to that same question: what did I like about how things went in my family? What didn't I? And that can be the beginning of that conversation with yourself, and then the exploration can go as deep as you want it to go.
How many of your clients are actually aware of these things in their childhood versus it being more like embedded in their subconscious? Like I'm sure with sessions and investigation, they can realize a lot of these things, but I feel like a lot of people probably aren't too aware of that, or they've developed mechanisms to avoid them. Yeah.
100%, and that's what our defense mechanism, when you say like, I just get defensive if Chad, what I take as a criticism, then I'm like off to the races in defensiveness. Right. Those were behaviors in our childhood that, worked for us. Like as kids, we're coming up with this myriad of behaviors to deal with, the ups and downs, ins and outs of the family. And they work for us because we're wired at that time for survival, right? Like how do I not make mom and dad go away, or, or for attention, or, how I got, how I felt like I could get love and attention. And some of them are, work even as an adult, but a lot of them don't. They're, that's the rewiring we need to do. And then we need to practice new behaviors and try, having these different conversations like we're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, but I didn't answer your question, Chad. You said, yes, also, yeah, most people know, you know, gosh, there's statistics on it. Like it's in the 90s of anyone who, just kind of comes to it on their own
Yeah.
of like, gosh, I bet I was wired this way, or, has some insight into it. But they might read something that kind of triggers, pricks that for them, or, talk to somebody. And people that come to me can cover the whole gamut. It's like, especially a couple, right? It might be like, well, my husband or my wife like thinks we have a problem. Like, I think everything's great,
Yeah.
and well, let's talk about what's great, but then, we'll start the exploration in that way. And, and then we have so many um, stigmas around coaching or
Yeah.
talking about these things, like, well, you only do that if you have a real problem, or like
Totally.
something's right. Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with you? Like, you should just know how to do this. And that's just so disempowering and
I don't
silly,
feel like you really, for me, until I started doing coaching, whether it was personal coaching that I did,
Mhm.
or coaching for our relationship, like I feel like I did not have self-awareness around anything, around how I
I
acted,
didn't.
around how much anxiety I was holding on to, around why I was acting the way that I was. Like, and yes, I meditate, and yes, but like the deep self-awareness around like why you're doing the things you're doing, I feel like comes from somebody kind of guiding you
Yeah.
through that.
Well, and having a safe place, that's kind of scary territory to go in on your own, right? Like
Yeah.
I think it's hugely courageous when anyone like decides to start that exploration. You
Yeah.
know, it's our inner landscape, we could, climb a mountain, and that's risky and dangerous, but I think this is right up there, in the same league.
I think as humans, we'd like to believe that we're adults and we've crafted our own values and we are the way
We
we are
are, and
because
we're not
we
going to
chose to
change.
be
And
that
that's just
way.
how it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't, do
Yeah.
you agree with the philosophy? I generally think that this is really broad, so, bear with me, but most
Hmm.
men end up being like their dads in specific ways, and most women end up being like their moms, the good and the bad. They tend to take a little bit of both. Like, I don't know, maybe when you get a little older, I just see it so
Oh
often.
yeah. Like we definitely, is, and it's something in this rewriting the mother code, that I always like to bring up too. It's, when you're looking at it without this exploration, we either kind of just flow in the river of doing things exactly like our parents did, and like, because
Yeah,
that was great, or we react to it. I'm going to not be mom, or I'm not going to
totally.
not be dad. So
Yeah.
there's that, there is that aspect. But yeah, and in that, not, I'm not going to be my parent. When you do see yourself like saying something that your parents said, it's like, oh my God, like what's happening here, because
Yeah.
it's gonna happen,
Yeah.
right? It's so wired in us, and then we can notice it, and like, oh, do I want to keep, saying that, or, being that way? And it can be, like you being more like your dad, Kelley being more like her mom, and it's both, right? And I'm say that because, as a couple, because we marry people like our parents that have qualities like our parents, even if
Yeah.
consciously we thought we married somebody nothing like our parents,
Yeah.
it's still going to be there, right? We can't help ourselves. It's the programming so strong, but that's a gift.
So
Is
you're
I
saying
see
that like
aspects,
Chad married someone like his mom,
Or that has
right?
certain
or
qualities.
like I
Has
have,
certain quality,
Chad has certain
yes,
qualities of my dad.
yeah,
Okay.
and your mom. So that's what I was going to say. Is like in
Ah,
my husband, I see qualities, positive and negative of both my parents and my husband,
Yeah.
for sure, and
very interesting.
yeah, and that surprised me because at first it felt more obvious, like ways he was like my dad.
Yeah.
But as we, continued and explored, it's like, wait a second, you're
Yeah.
acting like that, just like my mother, and
Yeah.
you're triggering me, like,
Yeah.
We're gonna have to have a whole
wrong
conversation
opinion.
about this after we get
You're
off this
probably,
podcast.
if I had to like guess, you're probably like consciously looking for the things that like you don't want that you saw in your parents, but
Yeah.
then like subconsciously you're being gravitated towards
Towards
like,
like all of it.
yeah, all of it really.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And we have this magic, I call it magical, like way of like, because we'll even present ourselves, this is all like evolution or whatever, I think, but um will in the dating and, and kind of early stages, that stuff doesn't show up right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the not mom or dad shows up more evidently, because I think if it didn't, we might catch on, like, wait a sec,
Yeah.
like this person, I'm not, I don't like those things.
Yeah.
It's not till we get like in that commitment and really in it, it's like that I'm going to say the work really begins. Then everything starts, and that's when you'll hear people say like, you're not the man I married, or you're not the woman I married. It's like, no, I am. It's just the real stuff starts showing up.
Starts to
And
surface.
to me, that's when the real work, and I've meant to mention this earlier, like around transitions, and this isn't a bad thing, and these transitions or these dynamics that come to the surface, it's not like the goal is to try and not have that happen. It's that, can we learn tools to learn and grow from them, and
because no one is going to stay the same in a marriage forever.
Yeah.
You're going to evolve as a person, and the person has to, but hopefully it does evolve with you.
Well, and
alongside
and I think,
you.
Yeah. And I think you asked this question early on, Chad, what, or maybe it was before we started recording, sorry. But kind of, what are some things that like make a relationship work, or are there signs like early on and something like that? And I would say that's one of them. Our
best quality and worst quality.
The best quality, I would say, hands down, is openness to growth, a growth mindset, like someone that's willing to like, that each other are willing to, at whatever pace, whatever level, but that opening is there. I find the biggest problem when one or the other, isn't willing to explore, and they just, like that, is a telltale sign. And, even when I work with singles who are, or people that are in relationship, and that, like, that's like the first quality to test out. Really, it's like, can I have an honest, truthful conversation? What happens when I tell the truth to this person? Right. And how do they respond? And, if I talk about, things growth oriented, how do they respond? Is there an openness? So
I think that's a really helpful like tool, like, or tip for people to like look for in their partner, or if they're not in a marriage yet, to be like observant for in their partner.
I think you just fundamentally need to understand probably two things. One, marriage is really hard and it takes a lot of work, and like pretty much almost inevitably you're both going to go through a lot of changes. So who you married probably is going to be a different person in 5-10 years. That's just a reality.
They still have their same like
of course, but
I mean, I think both of us do, like, base
but
quality, but yes,
but values change, motivations change, like focus changes. And like I think to her point, like if you're not open to growth, you're like, well, that's not who I married, like I want you to be that person, probably like a never-ending cycle, right?
Or a divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I and I think sometimes what's challenging is when that pattern's been allowed to, like, because some families will say like, or couples will say like, well, we stayed together for the kids, we managed okay, but those patterns got so deep that it's really hard for them to even imagine that they could get out of it, that it could be different. But I've seen it happen. It is possible, but you do have to do some then excavating of what just happened for this last chunk of time, to get yourselves back on track. Because I do bring people back to like what they liked about each other when they met, because, and what attracted you to each other. Both, it's going to show, some of the patterns that might, have evolved, but it's also going to, you're kind of reminded like, like there's a lot I really like about you. And those qualities are still there. I just haven't, let's see more of that.
Hey fam, if you are listening here, then you may be someone who deals with chronic overwhelm, bloating, anxiety, and weight you can't lose, maybe hair loss or skin conditions. If one of those things rings true for you, the Wellness by Kelley Health and Hormones course is available to help you get to the root cause and solve the issue in a way that's sustainable and
gives you your lifestyle with lasting results. No more diets or quick fixes, but real health and vitality for the long run. My course runs through everything from what labs to test for to what protocols to implement given what's off in your blood work. We cover a variety of hormonal imbalances and how to heal them, plus the mindset work that you'll have to do to change your habits. If you're ready for an environment where you can learn the tools and truly heal to feel your best, most aligned, light, confident version of you, then this course is for you. If you're feeling called to join the WBK Health and Hormones course, head to the link in the show notes to learn more, where you'll get my membership included with your purchase.
We said, when we get in a relationship, we don't really think about like our, a childhood or what informed how we act. We don't really think about our mother code when we get pregnant either. I know I didn't. It's kind of just like instilled in you. And I think that for a lot of us means that like when we become moms, we can succumb to a lot of different pressures. For someone who hasn't necessarily worked on their intuition or worked on their own self-connection, when they become a mother and they don't intuitively know how to parent, what is your first kind of opening to them? Like, what do you advise them to do?
I think it's something women are really afraid to talk about. Like, I'm just supposed to know how to do this. Like,
I think that like everybody's like, oh, read this book, take this advice, look on Instagram, see this person, how she's doing it. And it's like, wait, what is mine? And what is my mother code? And how do I want to be a mom? So like, where do you start with that?
Yeah. Well, we start by even acknowledging that's
there.
like that, right? that's there and that's possible.
Yeah.
Because it's so inundated, with ourselves to just even step out of that thinking for a moment, like, oh my God, everybody's doing it better than me. Or how do they all know what they're doing? Well, we don't. And so in many ways, right. We're all kind of trying and that's become even more evident it's weird because we see other people parenting and mothering, through social media, but we don't live in
their life
tribes and villages. And, we're actually like seeing each other or getting help from each other or that we've been around, that's had a big impact on the fact that it's not so self-evident, as it was for eons of years when you all live together and everybody's, you're watching everybody around you like do this. But we don't have that, we just have, so it's incumbent on us to like, you said, start making some of those choices for ourselves.
Right.
And, we'll not the risk of being totally repetitive. It is the easiest thing to start looking at is like, well, when I look at other people online or, somewhere else or my friends and how they're doing, how do I feel about that and how they're doing? What do I like? What don't I like? Yeah. What do I agree with? What don't I? And start formulating my own values, which can then lead to, setting my own vision for myself, as a mother. And we worked on that as a couple as well. But as a mother. So then I have myself to compare to before I start, comparing. And because we're very much in a culture of looking outside of ourselves for experts, for, the social media and, but how
do I feel?
So that first, how do I feel? And starting to get in touch with emotional responses. We haven't touched on this part. And I know we had touched on this aspect as well as, getting reacquainted with our emotional selves and that aspect of ourselves, because that has a lot of information for us. We're run by them way more reactively than we're aware. So it's something we want to start harnessing for ourselves. Like, ooh, how do I feel when I, hear that or see that, or, do I feel some joy when something just happened in my interaction, with my child? Like, I want to do more of that. We can start tuning in a little bit more. I don't know if that was specific enough, but it's a place to start.
That's really helpful. I think that it really, like, the whole comparison thing always goes back to like tuning out, because I see it in so many of my clients, whether it's with their bodies or with how they are as mothers. And it's like, it always goes back to, okay, well, what are you confident in yourself? Like, and how do you feel, is that aligned with you and your values? And so knowing what those values are and knowing like what makes you feel a certain way. But I think that what a lot of people struggle with is like actually slowing down enough to recognize how they feel.
Yeah.
And so like, is there any like sort of tangible advice you would give to someone? Like, I want you to meditate. I want you to write about how you feel. I want you to sit in a room and like think about how you feel. But like so many people are, I mean, even with my own clients, like it's like a struggle for me to like get them to have self-awareness around how they feel.
No, it is. And, unfortunately, that's a big part, became a big part of our programming so early on, right? Like what emotions were okay, what weren't. Most of them at any big level are supposed to be muted, or, that whole thing. And this, I always like to start people with a practice of, I use 5 primary emotions. Like there's, people can come up with a little bit different sets, but I use 5 primary emotions: fear, hurt, anger, sadness, and joy. So right from the start, like just, you write those down and you'll notice you have reactions to that. It's like, wait, like only one of them is a good emotion, right? So immediately we get to see our bias and how we just even think about, like, we're only all supposed to be happy, right? So just that's a start, just to explore how you feel about those primary emotions. But then a practice that you can start in right away is, whether it's with yourself or as a couple or even as a family, because we would do this at dinner time, and actually my daughters are grown and we still bring it in, and they still roll their eyes, but then everybody's happy we did it. We call it the feelings game. And, everybody gets an opportunity to share their day, but from those 5 emotions. Where did I feel afraid today? Where did I feel hurt? Where did I feel anger? Where did I feel sad? And where did I feel joy? And it's just ends up being such a richer conversation than how was your day? And, I'm going to rattle off some logistics about my day. It's like, and sometimes people are like, that I don't mean to make that also sound super simple. Like when you haven't been used to identifying where you've been hurt in a day, that might take some time to, but we're feeling those a zillion times throughout the day. We just haven't started tuning into it.
I love that, because you're also creating this like safe space within your family to start to feel those emotions if you're someone who hasn't necessarily explored that.
So this beginning is just to name them, right? And like put a label to these things that we felt today. And I know you 2 have 2, quite young ones, but we would start doing it with them when they were really young. So they just started, as they got more and more language, but they gravitate to it. Like they get it.
Yeah.
It's always amazes me, like how easy it is for them to access things like that.
I love that.
I do. Yeah, it's amazing. I feel like I'm not most worried about it. One of the things I'm most like drawn to, or I feel like I'll be most diligent at, or what I think is really important, or perhaps the most important, is teaching your kids how to identify and handle all the different emotions, and not 100%. Try to just escape them from, those 4 you listed, and try to bring everything to like a place of joy, which is somewhat of a thing in our culture, in my opinion. And it's really important.
Well, you can't even have that joy. Like really, we have this false belief that we'll just get rid of those and have that joy, but it's a continuum. And the more we're willing to feel our pain and sadness, the more we can actually experience actual joy.
100%.
And there's a big difference there. And we just had a time together as a family, and believe me, it wasn't remotely like perfect, and there was some some definite dynamics, and even as self-aware as you are, like it's there, but then we've had some great conversations after that, and like when you have those tools, like you're still going to get in it all, it doesn't keep you from even falling into the defensiveness or this or old behaviors and whatnot, when you're with family. And I say that because when you as a couple bring your kids to your families, it's like, the craziness that sometimes can be. But so the more equipped and aware we are, the more then we can kind of regroup and have conversations about it. But it's something, you know, our kids will say now, even though they'll still roll their eyes about the feelings game, they're like so grateful that they have
Yeah.
the social emotional intelligence that they do.
Yeah.
And that was
I
Absolutely.
feel like it's somewhat of a
hard-earned
common
undergrad.
fallacy for parents and families to think that like they're the only ones that deal with issues, and when
Yeah.
they get together, there's always these things.
No, that's why I like love being honest about like even like having this podcast and talking about the fact that like we came to see you, and it's like, is our marriage like horrible and like falling apart? No, but like, could we have used help? Like, absolutely. And like, that's why we did it. And I think that like one of the, you know, most challenging years for us was when COVID started. And I also like, we became parents, and like I started a business, and like I said at the beginning, it was just so much change all at once. And so I think that like being open and vulnerable to other people about that kind of stuff allows them to say like, oh, hey, I could ask for help too, or hey, I could, you know, but kind of like to tangent off that question, off of that statement, my question would be like, for women, I think that, I don't know if I'm alone in this, but having the first child, like for me, was a much harder transition than having the second one. And I don't know, I would love your opinion on it. Do you think it's because of the cultural, social expectations that are put on us as women, or is it because of the pressures like from our own mother code that we put, like that we haven't necessarily rewritten, that we put on ourselves? Because like my mom, you know, she is like the best mom ever. She was like the room mom with all the homemade snacks when we came home from school, like everything that you could ever desire. So, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, to answer your question, it's yes and yes. You know, like that's yes, there are differences, and I think based on, so overall, like I think I could say generally, like the transition to a first child it's, you know, there's nothing like it, right? Everybody's going into the unknown. Everything's unfamiliar. It's brand new territory. And, you know, and then that, you know, child gets to feel like, you know, the pressure of that, you know, it kind of ripple effects, right? Because you're the oldest, aren't you, Kelley?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, that would kind of make sense that it's like, yeah, you know, that's kind of how it is, that, you know, that first one, like, I can get in there, we can do this. But the pressure of that first one is, sorry, I misspoke that. It's really more as that firstborn is like how much you were wired to have to do it right. Right. And, you know, and do it well and without any training, and you're just supposed to know. And we're just, you know, it's just supposed to happen. And just like everything else I've been successful at, I have to be successful at this. But, you know, what does success even mean? And that goes back to the topic that we were just talking about. Like for me, first was challenging and definitely had its like transition challenges. Two put me over the edge. You know, it was, I had 2 months of like, I don't know how I'm going to survive, you know? And, so I think it is a little bit different, you know, for everybody. I don't know how that couple like had 2 and 3 and like felt like it was a breeze, and 4 is now the big one. So I think there's certain differences based on our wiring, you know, and then having this like, you know, what in our culture would look like super mom, you know, is then worth, you know, in the rewriting of the code, like, okay, she did that great, but you know, what was the cost of that to her, and how did she feel about doing that? And, you know, I think we dug into that a little bit, you know, and we got started on kind of that exploration of, you know, it's easy to kind of, you know, glorify, you know, that aspect, and we want to appreciate because you got benefit from that. And, you know, there's also a whole lot of other dynamics going on at the same time. Right. And so you want to look at the whole picture, you know, before we judge ourselves and think that's the best way to go.
Yeah, I tell everyone this. I say 0 to 1 is exponentially harder than 1 to 2. I don't know what 3 or 4 is like. I imagine 4 is going to be challenging, a little older, when we're tired. But yeah, it's so unfamiliar, like you mentioned. I think something you said earlier really stuck with me, and something I've always believed in. I think it is somewhat unnatural how we raise kids these days. Like, you're not in a village, and you're not in a situation where you're seeing all these things, and you have all this like
help,
you know, and it's really challenging. I think single moms especially are some of the
Oh my
most
gosh, yeah.
amazing people ever. I just don't even understand how they do it, let alone like how they stay sane and all the other things. So
I think that's one of the things that
Amazing.
for like that I hear from my own clients, that I hear from my friends, is like taking care of ourselves and like having like the confidence and like self-worth to ask for help, so that you can take care of yourself. How do we start to unwind that programming so we start to feel like we actually deserve it? Or are we selfish for taking care of ourselves in the first place?
Right. That's this myth that's been, and we have to the first thing we have to do is have compassion that like this has been something that's been wired generationally and in cultures for thousands of years. Right. And I'm going to, use the word masculine, feminine values, masculine, feminine, but values. And, we've been in a long stretch of a patriarchal culture, and women's role. I mean, we've come so far, but, we're still just coming out of like that. Our purpose on earth as women is to have and raise children. Like, that's it. If you don't do that, you're kind of like, don't even need to be here. Right. I mean, it's a reality that's, isn't as strong, but that we feel it, and it's unconscious. So some of what I, have women do is like do, honestly, a history lesson and understand the culture that we stand in, and how, one, we're not alone, and two, this has been passed down. So any movement we make toward acknowledging that, it's not selfish. As a matter of fact, it's imperative and necessary. And, we can tell ourselves all that, but we have to, start practicing it in like, small ways. And, people that are seeing you for coaching, are doing that in a way. Like, that's something they're taking time to do. And, the couple, when you set aside time to be with yourself, and any of the forms are good, just getting out for a walk and meditating, or, anytime you're taking to nourish yourself. But, that inner exploration, as you're going through all this, is one of the, the most long-standing, long-term benefit, ways of self-mothering, self-care that we can do.
Yeah. I think for me, once we had kids, you start to realize how critical and like almost spiritual like that time with yourself is, and like you really got to be diligent about what you use it for. And time together is amazing, time with your kids, but like it's challenging. You got to really like wake up early. You got to carve out time for these type of things.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a visual person, and someone gave me this visual once, where if you think about a tree, and the healthiest trees have the healthiest core, right? So if you think of yourself as that core, like that being in the best shape possible, and then your partnership from there, and then the family, which so counters our culture. It's like, no, like, you focus on the child. Once you have a child, then you're out here, but then that tree can withstand winds. It can, because that core is so solid. So thinking of yourself as that solid core, and how do I nourish it? How do I give it the nourishment it needs to stay healthy, strong, both emotionally and physically? It makes that it's a protective measure to like help you like through the tough times, because we're all going to have them.
Yeah. I like that. So what are some of the things that you do? Your kids are older now, so in a different period than us, certainly, but I'm sure you've utilized the same tips and strategies and things you do on a daily basis to keep yourself grounded. Like, what are some of those things, if you don't mind sharing? It's always a topic of interest for our listeners to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, if I even like look at my day today, it's like I have a big writing assignment that's due in a week. So, I got up early to work on that, but before I started writing, I did a little meditation and a little breathing, but I didn't want to spend too much time on that. So I held the writing as kind of a meditative space, and then I worked out, and then I spent time on like other work stuff. then, had time where I went for a walk and took some more time for myself. So kind of that in and out, and getting ready for this podcast, reviewing the material, but then I'll draw a card, which I did before, and I'll share it with you. It's from the Divine Feminine Tarot deck, and I loved it because it was called the Cosmic Egg, the Divine Feminine. I hold the universe within me, and I'm a force of ever expanding love. So, anywhere where we can kind of infuse, but I also had my own personal coaching session today, and that, was part of my day. So,
Right.
seeing where we can like structure and weave in all the like little things through the day and big things like, my own session. And then I'm in better shape to come here, and hopefully, to be with you. And
hold space.
We had a wedding call before this, and a whole range of activities through the day that I needed to take care of myself. I wanted to. It was fun.
I like how you kind of showed both like pieces of it. Like it could be as small as drawing a card and like having that micro moment, and it could be as big as doing a workout or having a meeting with your coach. Like it can look different throughout the day. And some days there will be more and some days there will be less. But as long as you're focused on the consistency of it, that's all that matters.
Yeah. That's the big, the big one. And then when you get off track, because the holidays, things are going to happen where, or travel, just something that throws you off, like kind of your routine. It's like, not to beat yourself up, but then it's like, okay, well, I just got to get, we'll start back up. It's not a reason, your mind is going to kind of say like, see, like, or you blew it, forget it. Our mind chatter can like really do a number on us in that form. So just watching out for that, and then, good pick back up.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful. I think that this has been such an informative episode. So thank you so much for your time.
Like I said, I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah.
Tell us
it was a treat.
Thank you. Where can our listeners, if they want to learn more on, relationship coaching with you or coaching on their mother code, where can our listeners find you? Yeah,
best place is my website, Gertrude Lyons, .com. I do show up some on Instagram, and I'm there. I would say I'm on LinkedIn also. If you just search Dr. Gertrude Lyons, you'll find me in all those places. I am doing a retreat down here in Mexico in the spring. So a huge like self-care thing for women. It's all about self-mothering and celebrating the spring equinox. So you can find information about all that and coaching with me on my website, or just reach out. Anyway, any of those ways. I love it.
Amazing. We will link you your website in our show notes as well. So thank you so much for being with us.
It was great seeing you. It was a great conversation.
I know.
Good to see your
face.
Thanks,
you too.
We really hope that you enjoyed that episode. You can follow me on Instagram at Wellness by Kelley. And if you're new around here, you can sign up for the WBK 7-day free trial, where you can get access to all of my low impact workouts, blood sugar balancing, plant-based recipes, and guided meditations, all available on wellnessbykelley.com and on the WBK app.
Hey, thanks for listening.
Please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also connect with us on social media at Wellness by Kelley. Drop us a DM for who you want to hear from.